Hi, my name's Scott Manley Hadley. This is Triumph of the Now TV, hashtag TOTN TV. This episode is all about Birmingham in the West Midlands, speaking to Gavin, who wrote the novel Midland, a novel out of time.
One of the kind of influences when I was writing Midland was a poem called City by Roy Fisher, which is, do you know it?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a kind of extended poem that sort of is basically kind of exploring the urban landscape of Birmingham. I think one of the lines is something like, "This city is not London, never could be." And it's just a really kind of beautiful rendering of the kind of industrial or post-industrial urban landscape of Birmingham. And I just love the way in which kind of Fisher used the city, but never named Birmingham. So actually I think somehow it was the way in which kind of the Midlands has been represented in other forms that perhaps had kind of more interest for me when I was thinking about what I could do with the novel form with kind of Birmingham as well. Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at like architectural movies about not movies but kind of films made. There is actually kind of an amazing film with Cliff Richard about Birmingham called, I think, Concrete City. And then I was also just kind of watching sort of videos about Birmingham, so either kind of journalistic videos or reportage, and then sort of the kind of the publications that were put out by kind of sort of urban like things like the Bourneville Trust. They had these kind of interesting sort of almost kind of montage type publications that would come out about sort of ideas for what could happen with Birmingham at that point. And it seemed like there was some really interesting materials in that sense that was, in terms of form again, like interesting to me. One of the things that's kind of, you know, almost a cliche now to say about Birmingham is that it's always tearing itself down and then rebuilding itself pretty quickly, which I mean you can kind of see recently with the Central Library and everything that's happened with that. So especially kind of when all the kind of central brutalist structures, the old bull ring was still there, and then things like how that linked up to Spaghetti Junction and all that kind of brutalist design, that was really kind of fascinating to me in terms of it being a kind of vision of a city. And that perhaps because of the size of Birmingham being a large city but not as big as the kind of sprawl of London, you could kind of, it was tangible, that imagination for the city. You know, you could kind of feel the kind of future they wanted to build still within that kind of space that was still kind of, to a certain extent.
I often find when I go there, it sort of feels like well, not anymore because not most of it down, but certainly 10 years ago, the 70s used to feel like a 1960s idea of what the future would look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I found quite fun.
Which was never kind of achieved, you know, which was only ever there. It was never actually kind of realised in its fullest kind of form, but you can nonetheless feel it, I think. Also partially because of the kind of the inner ring road and how that still kind of, even in its broken form, sort of places a kind of a certain dynamic around the centre, and you kind of cross over to different kind of areas. And yeah, absolutely, I think you can kind of, it's palpable. And then, but then there's the other side of it, you know, kind of the way in which when you get spaces like Bourneville or the Morpole Estate, the kind of Garden City ideas that were sort of jostling up against that kind of brutalist dream as well.
Why are so many post-industrial cities described as bleak, or are used as a bleak counterpoint in cultural products?
I think it's a variety of reasons. So there are the kind of social economic reasons that often, you know, the kind of the things that come hand in hand with shifts away from the forms of industry that cities such as Birmingham were kind of thrived through, and then what happens to kind of jobs and kind of ways of life when those kind of dissipate or replaced in other ways. So I think that has to do with it. Then I think there is also, which isn't separate, the kind of architectural elements, people have this kind of, especially it seems to me always in the kind of UK, this kind of resistance, which is changing as well, the kind of resistance to concrete as a material. I don't know why people find it bleak sometimes, you know, given the kind of the ways in which kind of the monotony of a terrace street, a brick terrace street, why that isn't bleak, especially given its kind of history as well, in terms of the kind of the small kind of terraces and being built for workers, why that isn't bleak compared to a kind of a grand brutalist dream. But
is it intention? Because the brutalist buildings were built with that sense of creating a community purpose, whereas the terrace houses were created without any ideology. And is it people pointing and laughing at people for having ideas above their state, sort of architects being overly optimistic?
Possibly. I'd never thought about it like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's also often to do with, though, the fact that, so I mean, again, the Central Library is a really good case in point, because that became, for some people, kind of a building or object of scorn, because it very quickly fell from its kind of dream, in that the central atrium, which began life as this kind of grand open space, was very quickly filled in by Paradise Forum, the kind of small shops that, and then they kind of filled it in that interior space, and that was because of financing problems, I think. So they had to kind of, you know, make that space. They had to kind of capitalise on that space, I guess. But it was actually that made it not the kind of dream that it had in its kind of beginnings. So it's often slightly kind of misdirected, the reasons why people don't like these spaces.
In Midland, you use the city as a character. How did you feel that? How did sort of that as an idea develop? And why does it work? Why do you feel it works?
I think the idea developed, first of all, just simply because I kind of I was interested in experimenting with the idea of the city as a kind of as more than a background, as more than a kind of environment, as more than a kind of place that was a scene for which characters would have interactions. I wanted the kind of the city to have a voice, which it does in a sense literally in part of Midland. At one point I did think that the city would speak as I to a great extent in the novel, but that didn't kind of necessarily develop in that way. But I think it still was really important that at one point I sort of put the city in the position of the eye and saw what would happen. I mean, then just to kind of sort of try to imagine how that feels. You know, you can't really kind of, without anthropomorphizing a city, but like how that would feel to kind of be in that state of kind of, I mean, the kind of with the cemetery as the kind of sinking heart, to think about all these transformations from the perspective of the kind of city itself.
Two of the most significant icons of English identity internationally come from the Midlands, which are heavy metal music and Shakespeare. Why are they not internationally known as things from the Midlands when, like the Beatles, for example, people think Beatles, Liverpool, no one thinks heavy metal, Birmingham. Why have we sort of been culturally ignored?
I don't know. It was a question that I actually kind of, you know, always sort of found curious in many ways. And I think there's various reasons. I mean, there's the kind of cliche reasons where people kind of dismiss the Brummie accent, or kind of it was always the kind of the butt of the joke. Then there's the kind of the notion that Brummies are kind of self-disparaging in some ways, and that, you know, you kind of don't have that sort of swagger, if you like, of some kind of other northern cities, and but I mean, I don't think that's really a material reason for it. Doesn't really seem kind of like that would mean that, you know, it would work in that way. But it just, I mean, perhaps, I don't know why, you know, you don't think Black Sabbath Birmingham in the way that you think the Beatles Liverpool. I mean, why not? It's really interesting, and I don't know. Even though kind of the kind of Black Sabbath sort of sound seems so kind of inextricable from the kind of environment in which it was formed. So I don't know. It's really it's why. It might also be perhaps because of this kind of place that Birmingham has, or the Midlands have. You know, it's not the north.
Yeah.
It's closer to London, but it's very much not London. So there's this kind of, I mean, the second city status. Why is there that kind of sort of? It doesn't seem to have enough of its own identity, or hasn't. I think that's changed very much with Birmingham. But yeah, I don't know. But in a way, I think it's a kind of. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing all the time, because I think, you know, there isn't, in the sense that there isn't a kind of. I'm not sure I would want to have that immediate association between Shakespeare and, you know, I think it's kind of nice in a way that Birmingham doesn't have a kind of immediate kind of like, oh, okay, Birmingham, Black Sabbath, Birmingham, Shakespeare, because it seems then that there's much more capacity for other kind of associations to be made as well. There isn't a kind of leading one in that sense. And, you know...
and I suppose if you focus too much of your identity on one thing, you lose a lot of nuance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, Birmingham is such a diverse city that it would seem a shame in some ways that you would just think of Black Sabbath.
Generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. In the fields, the bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning. Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. Death and hatred to mankind, yeah, poison in their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord.